Hello, everybody. Joe Bag Donuts here. Welcome back for another episode of Mahoyo. Last time we left off, Aoko finished premeditating her murder. Now, let's hop in there and see that murder in action. It probably won't turn out that way. You know, just a hunch, just a smidge of a hunch. Oh man, I'm tired. Ugh. It's not even 6:30 yet. 6:30 a.m. I went out, got some lovely McDonald's coffee because I was in the mood, you know? I just wanted a nice egg McMuffin and like a blueberry muffin. And did I say an egg? I think I said like an egg McMuffin. Wait, is that what they are? Yeah. Yeah, the English muffin ones, and then a regular blueberry muffin and this coffee. It was supposed to snow last night, which there was a little sleet on my car, but then it turned to rain, so any actual snow that was here is long gone. I'm probably going to have this freeze overnight for me when I go into work tonight. Hopefully I'll be able to squeeze in another part between when I wake up in the evening and when I actually have to go into work. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty skin of my teeth in order to get the next video out, you know, so that way there's actually something to come out. I think this one's going up on the 18th? That sounds right. I don't know. You'll know when you're watching this. You can check the date, and that's when it came out. Crazy, what a concept. Soto returned to his apartment on foot, as per routine, under a blanket of clouds in the night sky. The rusty stairs of his apartment building changed with every step. Clanged. I was about to say, they changed? Like, that's a lot of, like, paint jobs to do. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the bicycles parked by the apartment building's outer wall. He debated the pros and cons of a bicycle, how much easier life would be versus the expense, the convenience versus the necessity, but in the end, decided one was not right for him just now. Clutching the bag of apples under his arm, he took out the key to his residence. It's not like he can't live without it. He tilted his head in confusion. More and more, he found himself preoccupied with such random thoughts, when the real issue at hand was deciding what to do with the apples he had just received. He placed the paper bag by the sink and switched on the lights. It was just after 10 in the evening. With the end of term exams just around the corner, he had come home an hour earlier than usual. As he made back for the kitchen to pick up one of the apples to snack on, he found an envelope stuffed into his mail slot. The envelope had no name, return address, or stamp. Inside was a single piece of paper that only had the sender's name and a short message. It read,
話があるので、今夜どこそこのここに来られたし、大事なようなので、来るまでずっと待っている。
A concise set of orders neatly written. It was signed Aoko Aozaki. She had been considerate enough to enclose a detailed map of the meeting place. Puzzled, he cocked his head to the side, then headed out the door. Afterward, upon the room's sole tenant leaving the premises, the envelope burst into flames and evaporated without a trace, as though it had never existed in the first place. I was about to say, you're just like leaving evidence behind, but no. Ooh, how atmospheric. By the late 80s, Japan's post-war, threw an extra E in there at the end, economic boom had somewhat stabilized, and the city experienced a period of steady growth. The city's modernization marched on, and the Japan Railway's train station, symbol of the new era, neared completion. In Misaki's neighboring town of Yashirogi, a new symbol of its own was about to be born. Those buildings don't seem very stable. Yashirogi bred in Kittyland. It was Misaki's worst investment. Years later, it would be dubbed the fool's gold of the economic bubble, a relic of a bygone era. 10 years ago, Yashirogi's renowned Tokitsu baking company ran factories all across the nation. Its proprietor was a middle-aged gentleman, about age 56, by the name of Yurihiko Tokitsu, known affectionately by most as Topan. He took it upon himself to begin investment on an estate on the outskirts of Yashirogi and broke ground on a recreational wonderland that he hoped would be the pride of Misaki City. The long-awaited opening came in 1981. After 3 years of investment, the local amusement park, full of all kinds of hopes and dreams, began its short-lived tenure. It covered more than 85 square acres. Its magnificent merry-go-round dazzled all who passed through the park's gates. Its roller coaster twisted and turned about the edges of the park like a writhing Japanese dragon. Its Ferris wheel, packed beyond necessity with gimmicks, was said to have tested the limits of modern engineering.
完璧だ。遊園地に必要なものは全て積み込んだ。
Yeah, but is there enough people nearby to, like, fuel the, like, local economy for an amusement park? Old Yurihiko looked upon his creation and smiled. Only boosting his confidence was the fact that its grand opening was staged during a period of prosperity, the springtime of the world. But, in spite of this, they splendidly miscalculated the balance between aspirations and sophistication. Its mascot, Kitsy, was poorly designed and appeared to be a cheap knockoff. The park was stuffed to the brim with bread stands. Even its impossible-to-navigate mirror maze seemed out of date from the start. There are no dreams to be had at Kittyland, only nightmarish satire. Numerous trade magazines lambasted Kittyland's shortcomings, and customer attendance declined. There was even an incident where a 6-year-old strayed from his mother, had an accident, and nearly died. 1986, 5 years after the park opened. The situation had grown from bad to worse, and the park was hemorrhaging money. On top of everything, Yurihiko, who had bet everything on the success of the mascot Kitsy, retired, and Kittyland's operations were officially in trouble. And thus, amidst the scorn of nearly all residents of the area, ended Misaki City's one and only amusement park. What's more, perhaps best described as a footnote in this debacle, the self-proclaimed Parisian artist who designed the mascot, Toki Julik? Okay. Was said to have snapped his brush in mourning over the closure of the park. Returning to the present. That didn't sound like a very French name, but what do I know? It was midnight, and the Kittyland of today was a shadow of its former glory. Like a doll abandoned in the corner of a toy box, the lonely park was illuminated only by the light of the town that continued to live around it. Sojiro closed the Yashirogi guidebook that he had picked up on the way here. The story of its history was almost difficult to believe, but he supposed this is what people refer to as entropy. The park's front gate was unlocked. When he walked here the previous time, the iron fence was forced shut with a rusty chain, but the chain was nowhere to be seen and the gate left ajar. Following the map drawn in the letter, Sojiro quickly made his way inside. She seems like a fairly irrational person in general. It's not that far out of left field. Sojiro complained, quite a character for him. It's probably because, in spite of his naivety, even he knew that something was amiss. Though the park was abandoned, this was still trespassing. Unlawful entry, larceny, burglary. There were certainly not things, or perhaps crimes, that Sojiro was proud to do, but... Money, the real reason his conscience was gnawing at him. He clapped his hands in apology towards the statue of Kitsy, on whose eyes the paint had begun to aptly dissolve. Sojiro passed the mascot bleeding red paint from its eye sockets and began to walk the night park. The building's colors had faded. The collection of machines was rusted. The man-made residents no longer felt the passage of time. Even the ghosts themselves would not endure the disparity between this forsaken place and its previous grand stature. It was like a fossilized dream. Where these these were the ruins of a paradise both created and abandoned by man and reality. The economy had stabilized, and the standard of living was on the rise. Nobody was overly concerned with the future. These were the remains of a wild and exciting era. His breath turned to white wisps before him. Sojiro continued through the abandoned amusement park. Though void of human presence, this was not nearly as frightening as the darkness deep in the mountains. City suburbs can take many different forms, but Kittyland was unusual for an amusement park in so much as it had been built adjacent to a residential district. The park was surrounded by a forest, but even that, ultimately, was man-made. It was no different from the curtains on a classroom window. If you were to scale the iron fence encircling Kittyland and break through the 20 yards of afforested trees, you can make it back to the familiar townscape. Though the amusement park tended to arouse dread in the city folk, to Sojiro, it was a little different from the commotion and terror of downtown. There's only like one good amusement park around where I grew up. Even then, it was on the smaller side, and old. The attractions are like wooden roller coasters with no loops. The Central Plaza was silent as a grave. According to the map, the meeting spot was west of here. Waiting for Sojiro at his destination was a rugged, imposing, magnificent castle towering before the backdrop of the cloudy night sky. Even for an abandoned park, it was a remarkable structure. If the roller coasters and the Ferris wheel were loud, intense attractions, this was, in comparison, quiet and easygoing. It was one of Kittyland's 3 iconic structures, and, in a way, the wicked fortress that guided this paradise down the path of closure. Generally speaking, amusement park mazes generally fall into one of 2 categories: a labyrinth, which disorientates its visitors with its sheer size, and a house of mirrors, which disorientates visitors with optical illusions. Many of a labyrinth's guests enjoyed a brief sense of adventure that it afforded. Over the years, however, it would be usurped by the ever-increasing thrills of new attractions, such as the way of all trends, the curse of fads. The new must give way to the newer. On the one hand, the House of Mirrors was a time-honored, beloved staple. Within even the confines of a classroom's dimensions, well-placed mirrors and well-directed lights could both perplex and delight its visitors. And figuring in the cost of maintenance, a well-designed House of Mirrors could far outlive its labyrinth brethren. Even if both types faded into obscurity, they would remain a staple of what constituted an amusement park. However, that didn't mean that combining them would produce double the fun. Yeah, that just sounds nightmarish. You need to send in staff with a map of the maze in order to fucking get lost kids out. Together, they transformed from entertainment into an uncanny realm from which those who dared to step in could never leave. In a similar sense, Kitsy's Mystery Tour Castle was the park's very own otherworld. Indeed, 5% of visitors ended up requesting staff assistance to get out. Modeled after European castles, it was far greater than a football field in length, and its interior was further split up into 3 floors. That sounds hellish! 2 floors above ground and 1 below, lined with mirrors from top to bottom, equal parts complex and vast. The maze demanded at least 30 minutes even from veterans. One visit was all it took to be struck by claustrophobia for hours. It was this labyrinth that now stood in Sojiro's way.
真っ暗ってわけじゃないな。電気とかついてるんだろうか。
It seemed that Sojiro, unaware of what a House of Mirrors even was, concerned himself only with the lights. He checked the letter from Aoko once more. The letter read, "I will be waiting in the first floor lobby of the House of Mirrors." The meeting place was definitely in here. There was something to be seen by at least... What? There was something to be seen? There was something to see by at least. Does that sentence make sense? There was something to see by at least, as he could just make out lights faintly through the open doors. Okay, yeah, I just needed to read the second half of the sentence, go figure. Putting aside his suspicions, he headed towards the entrance. The sound of his steps against the brick-laid path echoed faintly. He was far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The park's clocks no longer made tick nor talk, and the winter's bite no longer blew in the night. From within the silence, the stillness that would cause any onlooker to hold their breath, Sojiro stopped abruptly at the entrance to the House of Mirrors.
ところで青崎、そんなところで何してるんだ?
He called out, turning towards the plaza. Were you just like hiding behind a trash can? The sound rang out as if someone had dove behind a garbage can and it fell to the ground in their haste. Short silence ensued, unless she also just got here because, he got home an hour early, which meant he got his message an hour early. For a moment, the abandoned park returned to its previous hush. Resigning to having been exposed, the girl appeared from her hiding place.
Oh.
Nice boots. His voice died in his throat as he took in the sight of the girl's familiar face and unfamiliar attire. This Aoko, with her long flowing hair in the breeze, was different from the Aoko that Sojiro knew. The resolute stance and posture she took exuded the strength of her will. She stared directly at him with a sharp-eyed, piercing gaze. Her eyes were glowing with a dim, phosphoric light, enough to give Sojiro pause that he might be hallucinating. An icy coldness and a girl's strength. Sojiro lacked a sense of danger, but the sense of imbalance caused even him to feel malice in the air. It was as though the Yukiona spirit of folklore had climbed out from a ghost story and had appeared here in reality.
Aozaki.
Instinctively, Sojiro took a step back. Surprised, he was starting to feel concerned. An unpleasant premonition rose to the surface, bringing with it a sense of anxiety. In spite of this, he felt obligated to honor urban etiquette by seeing if she was all right.
その顔を見るに何かあったのかと一応聞いておくんだけど。
Without acknowledging him, Aoko took a step forward. Her figure, this atmosphere, Sojiro found himself recalling a recent memory. Yep, she's in work mode. His twisted and knotted apprehension melted away and was replaced with a glowing realization. Growing, not glowing. Oh god, my coffee. Where's my coffee? I'm fine. I didn't just choke on a ball of spit. Ugh. The girl before him was very similar to someone he had seen before, that night in the park, though he had only seen her from behind. With increasing certainty causing him to swallow nervously, he noted that they might as well have been identical.
何をしていたかって話なら見ての通りよ。ここ
Hiding?
で獲物が通り過ぎるのを待ってたの。あなたが入ってから私も入って逃げ道をなくすつもりだったから。
Aoko said, perturbed by the swift change in plans.
そうか。待ち合わせ場所は合ってたんだな。
Sojiro was mightily relieved that he had not gotten the wrong place. It was unclear whether he felt confident about dealing with what was to come, or he had simply failed to grasp the hopelessness of the situation. Aoko ignored his obtuse response and continued.
私はね、しずきくん。嫌いな人とか憎い人とかは人並みにいるんだ。ただ、ちょっと変なのが敵になるやつの条件でね。
Yeah, crazy how that works. Cold emotion burned in her eyes. Her feet had already moved one step closer to Sojiro. Sojiro's sense of foreboding was growing stronger. Wondering if what he sensed was bloodlust, he retreated another step. Continuing as so, they maintained a distance of just 15 feet.
昔から私は嫌いな相手でも敵と思ったことはなかったの。でも逆に好きな相手を敵だと思うこともあった。理由は単純。
She held her right arm out. The light about her was no illusion.
当たり前のことだけど、私は私の感情を乱すやつが敵なのよ。
What a selfish person you are. Her arm moved again. It was instantaneous. Something shot past Sojiro in the blink of an eye, missing him by just a foot to his left. Before his eyes, a blue light, something akin to a fireball, had ignited from nothing. He finally understood what was happening.
ちょっと待った。今のは大変見覚えがある。
She ignored his dim-witted reaction. Is your aim just bad, or did you not have the guts? Oh my god. Aoko muttered to herself. The fist-sized hole of blue light had made it in the House of Mirrors. Crackled and smoldered. A shot like that could easily cave in a human skull in addition to burning it to a crisp.
こんな射程で外すなんて、アリスに見られたら自殺者ね。
It's like when you're playing XCOM and you miss a 97% shot from like one tile away.
でも、これで分かったでしょ。二度目だものね。あなたにとっては。
If it's not 100%, it's not guaranteed. Sojiro backed away swiftly. Things were beyond incomprehensible. He was close to losing the ability to think at all. All he could make out was the figure of the dependable student council president, or at least what he had thought was the president, and the memories of the park that 2 nights before. He never experienced anything like this, though most people living in a civilized country would have never seen anything like it either. A lethal weapon that could kill people with nothing more than the pull of a finger had a way of suspending the ability of its target to determine between not just good and evil, but dreams and reality, past and future. And the more peaceful someone's life had been, the stronger that suspension was likely to be. All that one could think was that the fact that they were alive at the very moment. It was as if he was an unwritten character on a blank piece of white paper. There was no before, there was no after. There was only what came next. This was a very common thought process for anyone staring down the barrel of a gun.
あ、命乞いはやめてね。意味ないから。でも、恨み事ならご自由に。殺す側の義務として一言一句聞いてあげる。
By saying it was pointless, she made it sound more like she would not listen to what he had to say. However, Sojiro was in such a state of shock that it did not even enter his mind to speak up. Like in the effects. All he knew, for reasons unknown, was that the girl in front of him wanted him dead.
嘘つきにも程がある。飛び丸のバカ。何がそんな生き物はいないだ。実際いるじゃないか、こんなお化けみたいなのが。
Sojiro felt that he had said that out loud. The second blast would come even quicker than the last, so he kept it to himself. His mental expletives stirred his mind from paralysis to mere panic. This response came not from confidence, however. Someday, out of the blue, someone is going to kill me. While it may have seemed like a baseless belief to hold.
そうだった。都会には殺人事件がある。
Yep.
ルールを破れば殺されるのは当たり前だって、ちゃんと教えてもらってた。
I mean, sometimes you just get got for no reason. To Sojiro, the situation seemed to perfectly align with his inexperienced understanding that the city was a coldly pragmatic place. As far as he was concerned in this moment, being killed by a classmate was not something to be surprised by. In a society where murder was possible, he was able to accept this sort of situation as natural. But virtually no concern was the series of events that led to Aoko's aggression towards him. Just, oh, I must have done something, now I gotta die. Ain't that crazy? The only thing that truly confused him was Aoko's blue fireball. Sojiro swallowed with an audible gulp. To anyone who may have been watching, it was the response of a victim paralyzed by fear.
そういうことよ。ようやく理解してくれたわね。
I don't really think he does.
多くは語らないけど、あなたにはここで死んでもらう。 魔術は隠匿するものなんて言ってもそっちには関係のないことだし、単に運がなかったって
Yeah,
思
yeah, just do your
う
fucking villain monologue, Aoko.
大事なのは私があなたを殺したってことだけだから。
Done talking, Aoko once again lifted her right arm. There was a hum like a machine. Blue light began to revolve around her arm beneath her sleeve. This was taking longer than last time, leading Sojiro to believe that it was going to be much stronger than the attack that was still scorching the wall behind him. The realization caused his panic to heighten.
いやなんだつまり始末するとかしないとか、あの夜のお化けは青崎だったとか、都会は本当に込み入ってるとか、そういうことじゃなくて。
His thoughts became jumbled. His heart pounded like a hammer. This was no time to be standing still. He was not sure if the girl in front of him was really human. More importantly, even if he could accept the events unfolding before him, when all was said and done,
待て、人殺しはいけないんだぞ。
even if it was a fact of life in the city, Sojiro was not about to lie down and die.
分かってるわよ、そんなことは。
Sojiro's scream, still entirely oblivious, was just the thing to invoke Aoko's full wrath. Aoko fired a barrage of blue magic bullets. In an instant, Sojiro dashed into the shadows behind him, into the entrance to the House of Mirrors. Oh, this is a great place to have a fight. I got a bloody nose in a House of Mirrors once when I was a kid because I was just running through it and I fucking smack right into a clear pane where I thought there was nothing. He darted feverishly down the hall. After a mere few feet, he was left completely out of breath. This was due to his shock at seeing yet another attack, fiercer than the first, that he hadn't seen in his life. And because he couldn't shake the thought that if he had moved even a second later, he would be dead. He could not afford to stop. The sound of merciless footsteps closed in behind him.
けど助かった。ここならなんとか。
He threw everything into his legs as he sprinted. A straight, narrow passage, about 60 feet long, connected the entrance to the main lobby. At this rate, if he could just make it to the lobby, he was sure he would be able to find as many hiding spots as he needed.
助かった。
He arrived in a large open space. This was the first floor lobby. There were 3 passageways. One led to the basement floor, one connected to the first floor maze, and another was a set of stairs leading to the second floor. Sojiro did not particularly care which one he chose, so, trusting his intuition, made a run for the first floor maze when he smacked his head into a transparent wall.
鏡。
ええ、面倒だけど、それならフェアでしょ。
Does it? I don't think it does.
追いかける方にも逃げる方にも有利不利がある。
Somehow cheerful voice echoed in his direction. There was no need for Sojiro to even turn around. In the very same mirror that he had crashed into, he could see Aoko Ozaki's figure slowly approaching.
それと、1階の奥にある出口は封鎖しといたから。結界じゃなくて物理的に。
You mean like you put like a metal bar on the door, or you just like threw up a mirror on the exit pathway so it's like blocked off?
やりすぎて封鎖っていうより瓦礫？土砂崩れ？どっちでもいっか。とにかく下手に出口に近づくと崩落に巻き込まれるから。生き埋めが嫌なら近寄らないことね。
Alright, so you just knocked over a fucking load-bearing wall. Panicked by the impending footsteps, Sojiro groped for the wall. He could see the stairs to the second floor. Did not understand what Aoko had meant earlier, but he at least knew that the first floor was not going to save him.
ま、私としてはそっちのが助かるけど。
Yeah, then you wouldn't have to feel the guilty conscience of having, you know, pulled the trigger yourself.
形式上、事故死の方が後始末とか楽だから。
Behind him was a creature beyond words. As she continued her idle taunting, she lifted her right arm up ostentatiously Big words. They hurt my head. It was more than 3 syllables like he lost me. Even from above her clothing, one could see some kind of strange, incongruous incongruous pattern upon her body. The veins beneath her skin made it seem as though something inhuman was circulating her body. Whether out of pity or repulsion, Sojiro stopped for just a moment. His pursuer evaded his gaze.
ああ、これ普段は塗り薬で隠しているんだけど、今日は特別。
Is your ointment stinky too?
魔術刻印って言ってね、魔術師の
Do
証
you
みたい
smell
な
like
も
a
のよ。
fucking apothecary?
ほら、光が回ってるでしょ。これがさっきのスナップ。わかりやすく言うと弾丸の元。今日は調子いいし、私魔力を効率よく使うのだけは自信あるし。
Man, for someone whose job it is to like
あと
keep the
30%
mystics hitting,
かな。
you're like a
さっ
real
きみたいに
chatterbox
装
about
着が
it.
できるのは。
Perhaps she was on an emotional high. Her voice had become frightfully friendly. The substance of the conversation could not have been any more unsettling, however.
そもそも何を言っているかよくわからないんだけ
You're
ど。
fucking techno-babbling him, but with magic.
わからない？弾数はあと30発ってこと。そこまで逃げ切ればあなたの勝ちよ。とりあえず今日のところはね。
今日はって明日もあるのかな。
It's like, man, I gotta like work and I gotta study for exams. I don't got all this time to play with you. Sojiro knitted his brows. Ako's expression creased into a scowl at his behavior. Although he was panicking, it seemed that deep down he still did not feel the full weight of the crisis. She knew he still didn't get it.
宣言はしたわ。自由時間はこれでおしまい。まだ罵り足りないだろうけど、ま、その手の時間はキリがないしね。この辺りで諦めて。
It appeared Aoko had prepared this theatrical dialogue ahead of time. Not to allow her opponent time for futile pleading, but to give him the time to curse her, his killer. For forthrightness was her modus operandi. With this victim, however, it was not going as she had hoped.
とにかくそういうことだから。じゃ、狩りの時間と行きましょうか。
Her voice was void of emotion, and her eyes ruthless as they bored into her prey. This time, Sojiro finally accepted that he was going to die. Silent as the dead, it stepped into the remnants of a dream that had long since seen no visitors. There was no wind this night, nor a soul to be seen. Still, it heard the echoes from within, clasping its hands together, and grinned. Its form, with hands clasped, resembled that of a budding tulip. The bearer of this artificial flower reflected in the cloudy mirror of the ticket attendant's office next to the gate. Next to it stood a display board, corroded by years upon years of rust. Number of visitors today? 2. Number of today. The board had graffiti crudely scrawled on top of one of the words. It was replaced with deaths. The records board had long ago fallen to disrepair. After taking a full 10 seconds to digest what it was looking at, it made its own revision. Number of visitors today? 3. Number of deaths today? 1. After appending this number with an index finger, she smiled like a flower. Then she began to walk towards the source of the sound. Well, that sounded mechanical. It had been 10 minutes since this rhapsody had begun to echo from the House of Mirrors. The amusement park's entrance returned as it was before, soulless. We got a wild card entering the fray? In the end, even if Sojiro had been the luckiest man alive, There's no way he should have been able to escape. The question, however, was how much of that was by design, and how much was sheer coincidence. Even Aoko, who had made all the arrangements, had no answer. Indeed, there were only three things she could say. It was taking longer than expected. He was putting up more of a resistance than she had anticipated, and that choosing the House of Mirrors was a mistake. She had really screwed the pooch on this one. The location itself was an excellent choice, as the House of Mirrors was perfect as a hunting ground, but seeing her own incompetence reflected in the mirrors had begun to grate on her. The moment Aoko's right arm began to growl, Sotaro made a beeline for the staircase in front of him. A strobing series of blue flashes lit the room behind him. The hunter calmly followed her prey, and the prey desperately ran for his life up the stairs.
注文通り
Don't enjoy yourself so much.
そうでなくっちゃお膳立てした甲斐がない
In stark contrast to Sojo's frenzied escape, Aoko walked briskly up the stairs. She elected not to run after her prey in order to maintain a set distance. As she lacked confidence in her accuracy, the hardest thing for her to deal with would be if he charged right at her and went down fighting. But at a distance of 30 or so feet, he posed no threat. By the time her prey drew near, she could fire 10 shots and hit with at least 4 of them. That's really bad accuracy. What's your... Do you have, like, no depth... not depth perception, that's something else. Depth perception. Their positioning just a moment ago hadn't been ideal. At that distance, in a space that open, if he flanked and rushed her, there was a chance, however small, that it could turn into a fistfight. Currently, Aoko's best weapon was the bullets from her right arm. She was going to capitalize on that advantage. It's in her best interest not to close the gap between them. If there was a good time to approach, it was only after her prey had become exhausted and had lost the will to continue. Oh, so Aoko hasn't learned the art of fucking throwing hands yet, it seems. Would she pierce his leg? Shoot him in the back? Perhaps would he just give up after losing himself in the labyrinth? The hunt would end when her target sustained some sort of injury and became unable to run. I'm not very good with S's. I have a fat tongue, so I end up, like, biting the side. On Sojiro's end, he could barely bite back on screaming as he bolted through the maze. Even running in a straight line had become difficult, much less searching for an exit. Honk. The corridor stretched out far before him, so the mirrors blocking the path made it seem. Panicked, he made a turn to the right. The trick is you gotta look at the floor. Like, right where, like, the mirror meets the ground, there's usually some sort of line or indentation. Clutching his head with his right arm, Sojiro led with his left, groping through the air to see whether a wall was there or not. He dove down the hall to the left, narrowly dodging the bullets targeting his life. Urged on by the sound of approaching footsteps, he ran without thinking. The last one was close. Air closer would have meant his life. He caught the odor of burnt hair from the back of his neck. He was very lucky. Perhaps very unlucky. If he were actually lucky, he would not be in this situation in the first place. The second floor of the House of Mirrors was constructed like a giant spiral. It wound left, starting from the outside wall. Eventually, it would lead to a dead end. The more he tried to escape, the more cornered he would become, as though he were trapped in a twisted guillotine. His stifled screams threatened to leak out his complaints. No matter what he did, he was going to be killed. All his struggling merely served to prolong the inevitable. Yet he ran. No matter how many mirrored walls he rammed himself into, he ran. Even after crashing so hard that his forehead bled and he saw stars, he ran. Pain shot through him at every turn. The more frantically he ran, the more intensely he smashed into the invisible walls. His body began to understand this rule and begged him not to run anymore. His breath was already ragged after sprinting a couple hundred feet. No matter how he thought about it, this was not normal. This was way too crazy. This was all just a bad joke. If he turned around now, she would apologize to him for taking it too far. His mind had gone blank. As his body continued to slam into the mirrors again and again, his feet slowed as they began to believe that perhaps it really was all a joke. But then, he felt a chill, a touch of death upon his neck. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Sojiro knew this kind of terrible chill far too well. Ever since he had arrived in the city, he'd come to face with more than one or two near-death experiences. For someone who did not understand city life, his present predicament was not unlike when he experienced traffic on the streets or the commuter rush on the station platform. He was far from an innocent babe unable to comprehend life or fear. Rather, everything he had ever known became irrelevant when he was flung into a completely different cultural sphere. In society's promises of safety, something urbanites took for granted, were threats unknown. So he was used to this already. Though if he were to be honest, he was dissatisfied with some things. Oh god, I hate this word. Superfluous. I know it's not superfluous. It's like superfluous to necessity. Superfluous. There we go. It's not peer. Superfluous. This world was overflowing with valueless things, and they were all dangerous in some way. Even the everyday necessities sold at the convenience store were, as far as he was concerned, amazing tools. Civilization had raised the standard of living so high that it had numbed humanity's sense of danger. The city's constant pursuit of wealth and convenience was a poison to a country boy like Sojiro. And he did not have the capacity to accept these conveniences. That it was possible for such conveniences to easily and suddenly be misused and cause unintended accidents had always made him anxious. Why? He had to wonder why he was even here. No, that was more of a why instead of a why. How ironic. It took the real threat of death to finally make him realize. Like a divine revelation that he failed to understand until now. He always had to expect the unexpected. Near-death experiences were more common than one might think. To begin with, safety was something that came at a price. Being alive meant that the opposite was always lurking around the corner. It's just like a streetlight at night. When the sun rose, its illumination would naturally disappear. Another barrage of strange projectiles whizzed mercilessly by him. It recalled in the back of his mind the charred remains of someone at the hand of that blue flame 2 nights prior. Somehow, this situation reminded him of a horse being led by a dangling carrot. For now, he lifted his head and continued to run through the labyrinth. But for what purpose? Though he knew the pain in his chest was very real, he disconnected from it. The night sky visible through the skylight was a muddy ultramarine, no longer resembling the one he knew. Good old light pollution. He managed to calm himself. Sojiro began to laugh in despair, as though something rather precious had been broken. Everything had become meaningless away. Anyway. Even so, his legs somehow made their way forward at the sight of a reflection in the mirror. Like a game of cat and mouse, Sojiro fled through the labyrinth of mirrors. Then, after 4 minutes, that strangely unreal tension ended. The ninth shot of blue light hit inches away from him. It exploded the moment it made impact, launching Sojiro into the opposite wall. Of all the fire he had taken thus far, This shot indisputably brought him the closest to death. Groaning, he collapsed to the floor. His back was on fire with pain. He was not bleeding, and was lucky he could still even scream. Yet, his body refused to move. Physically and mentally, he still had something to spare. Pain was not so bad that it prevented him to stand up. It was just that there was a skylight above him, and he could glimpse the dark of the night sky beyond. The feeling that overcame him was a raw, selfish bout of grief. It was just so cruel. To have to stare at that for the remainder of what short life he had left. What, can't even see the stars? Sojourner's ragged breath slowed. For all intents and purposes, he had given up. He had given up running away from the sound of the pursuing footsteps and perhaps even from the problem at the root of everything.
まあ、青崎に殺されるならいいかな。
Sojiro Suzuki felt things that in any other circumstance he would never feel. Incidentally, without exaggeration or embellishment, this was the only mistake he had ever made in his entire life. Staring vacantly into the night sky above, Sojiro listened as the footsteps drew nearer.
Give up?
It was the closest her voice had ever been to him. Perhaps feeling that he really had given up, she approached his collapsed form. In the dark, mirror-lined corridor, he could not make out her expression. Without a word, Sojiro raised his eyes to meet his murderer.
返事がないならそれでいいけど。調子狂うわ。普通どうして殺そうとするのかぐらい聞くものじゃない？
Aoko spoke from within the shadows. His eyes widened in bewilderment. Now that she had mentioned it, he realized that would have been the obvious question to ask. He had more or less picked up on the fact that he was being killed for learning some secret, but it was human nature to want to know more.
そっか。それはそうなるな。
A simple affirmation. His face was a mixture of resignation and forlorn longing. Thought for a moment before.
でも言う必要はない。
There was more of a pause there, with a comma.
聞きたくないんだ。そうい
He responded in a mature, subdued voice. Not like it changes what you got to do. His response was clear, rather gallantly so.
そう。じゃ、殺すけど。死ぬの怖くないの？
怖いに決まってる。
Yeah.
何より痛そうだ。
Can't do anything about it, though. His face turned wry as he objected, to which Aoko frowned. As nonchalant as he could be, he was honest about his feelings.
そりゃ怖いでしょ。私だって怖いと思うし。でも悪いわね。我慢して。人でなしと罵ってくれて結構よ。今の私は本当にその通りだから。そういった意味じゃあんたと同じ。普通の道徳がないのよ。だから必要なら人も殺せる。
Even though this is probably, like, your first time. Sojourner's finger twitched in response to her in a different tone. As if to say that, despite having given up on just about everything, his body could not let those words slide.
人殺しなんて良くないぞ。
Yeah, don't you know that, like, people die when they're killed?
分かってるって言ってるでしょ。
Aoko raised her right hand. The light from the crest illuminated her face. It goes without saying that her expression was unchanged. She was not crying, nor was she smiling. She was a young woman who had exercised her feeling, who had excised, not exercised. Deal with it was another thing Sojiro could not let slide. Sojiro could read on Aoko's face that she was not herself. She was in pain, and to a degree he had never seen her in before.
すまない。ちょっといいかな。
何？ここまで悲壮感を盛り上げておいて やっぱり逃げるなんてのは却
You
下。
really think this guy's smart enough to trick someone? He unconsciously smiled at Aoko's ruthless counter and breathed a sigh of relief. He had misread the pain he saw on her face. This was the same Aoko. Sojiro laughed out loud in genuine joy, a laugh that most other people would have taken as an insult.
遺言でも聞いてあげようと思った私が甘かった。っていうか、今の小バカにした笑いがあんたの遺言ってことで OK？
いや、そうじゃなくて、あそこにいる人は青崎の友人なのか？
Out of nowhere, Sojiro pointed behind Aoko.
はあ？
Aoko thought that must have been the old, overused distraction technique. Look over there! If this had been a Japanese comedy act, this would be the part where she gave him a whack with a paper fan. But after giving it a second thought, she realized Sojiro didn't have the capacity for understanding old, or even new tricks.
あんた何言って。
Perhaps his honest disposition had been to his benefit. Without thinking, Aoko gave in to her curiosity and turned her gaze towards the direction in which his finger was pointed. And there. A weird puppet. How strange. Something that should not have been in there in the maze. Something with a creaking wooden smile. It was the ominous, creepy, uncanny figure of a girl. Yeah, that puppet got curves.
人形？
An unusual figure with 2 arms and 2 legs stood silently in the darkness. Only for a moment, its beauty, which was even apparent from afar, dulled the insanity of the current situation. Ugh. Extend, extend, extend. The utterly unknown threat made Aoko freeze on the spot. Avoiding it didn't even occur to her. Humans possess intelligence and knowledge, but when confronted with the unknown, they fail to process what to do and... A shriek escaped Aoko's mouth. The magical attack crossed the 30-foot gap in an instant. The arm of the girl, who had appeared at the rear of the corridor, was slender and quick. It extended to a near impossible length, striking Aoko from behind. Aoko crashed into the wall as she fought back an anguished whimper. The attacker retracted her arm.
Aozaki!
Sojiro sprang up to his feet. He darted to her side and used all the strength he could muster to get her to her feet. How embarrassing. He could not believe how light she was. In Sojiro's mind, Aoko was an extraordinary individual. He expected that if he were to ever touch her, it would be apparent she was far stronger than he. But in reality, she felt about as heavy as you would expect a 100-pound girl to feel. Easily break her bones. Meanwhile, that thing continued to reel in its arm, as if it were some sort of mechanism. Having extended more than 30 feet from the elbow joint, it clanked as it returned to its previous shape and size.
大丈夫か?
About as okay as you can be for being hit in the side and fucking launched into the wall. Aoko tore her hand away from Sojiro's. Suddenly, she felt her knees buckle from under her, but Sojiro caught her before she could hit the ground and helped her to her feet.
無理するな。で、あいつは知り合いか?
Yeah, you never answered the question if it's a friend of yours. Looked back at the eerie shadow 30 feet away as it finished retracting its arm.
そうね。似たようなやつとは命をせめぎ合ったのかよ。
Aoko grabbed her lower back as she answered. Don't worry, that's me every time I have to fucking stand up from a chair, too. A searing pain shot through her.
痛いっちゃ痛いけど、打撲だけ。
I mean, hitting on the side, that's like a fucking kidney blow.
あれだけ絶好の奇襲をしておいて。それとも、この距離じゃ当たっても致命傷にならない。なんて、あるわけないか。
Aoko tried to steady her breathing as she assessed the damage done to her back. The pain was quick to fade, and her breathing returned to normal. For the time being, her motor functions were no longer hindered, which meant the real damage was elsewhere. Cool.
青崎あれ
分かってるわ。黙ってて。
Blue light glowed across the gloom. Magical energy generated by her breathing was accumulating in her right arm. Magical energy was the fuel. The formula was the igniter. For Aoko, this is little more than a reenactment of 2 evenings ago. Next time the puppet extended its arm, Aoko would fire a magic bullet as fast as she could. Battle at approximately 30 feet. As long as Aoko could secure a 2-second window, she could create a counterattack and end their duel. It made its move. With its head tilted down, there was no expression to be seen, and in the darkness, its apparent age was impossible to make out. To the two humans, the puppet was not dissimilar to a faceless ghost. Its left arm slowly came up with a grinding sound. Its movements were dull, as if its joints were rusty. The right arm, which had been extended earlier, hung at its side. Though the puppet's mouth was hidden by its long locks, the sense was that it was smiling. Spoopy.
さっきと用途が違う。あれが本命。しずきくん、どいて。
Oh, the mix-up on Oki! She threw herself into Sotro and extended her hand. Its arm extended at that very moment. The timing was impeccable. In a single second, Aoko's magic bullet scored a direct hit on the puppet's arm, reversing its trajectory and sending it crashing into the puppet's body with a violent explosion. Or at least, that's what would have happened had the magic formula had been invoked. Bruh, just straight up misfire? She barely avoided being struck once again. When her magecraft failed her, intuition took over. She just managed to get away.
やられた。最初のはそういうことか。
She clenched her teeth in frustration, thoughts racing a mile a minute. Fight or flight. Only had one arm left, which would take time to retract. This was the best shot Aoko had at defeating it. If she could evade the right arm just a fraction, she could get close enough to... Oh god, fucking Latin. I used to be able to speak Latin. I took like 3 years of it in high school. I even won awards from like the National Latin Honor Society. But that shit's all gone now. All I know how to do is ask to go to the bathroom. Fucking yamne ad latrinum, baby. A crackle echoed through the corridor. The poetic murmurs contained enough magical energy for a mage to perceive. The verse itself was Latin, but it contained hints of the language of curses, Gondar. Originally, there were words meant to curse a hated adversary. However,
Mea animae mortalis, otem eftura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est. Teode et te am, conveniamus insomnio ipso.
Spooky. The puppet was directing the words at itself. Curses beget curses. The victim calls down a curse on the assailant, creating a vicious cycle of negativity. Yeah, fucking revenge, dig 2 graves and all that. The incantation was meant to do just that. However, this is ultimately a one-puppet show. An unprecedented source of power akin to auto-intoxication. As unbelievable as it seemed, the cycle of curses had been turned into a perpetual motion device.
何それ。レベル高すぎじゃない。
Aoko abandoned the idea of digging her heels in. It was time to flee with all due haste.
何してんの。あんたも来る。
She grabbed Sojour's hand and ran as fast as she could, deeper into the realm of mirrors. The crackling voice continued its murmuring behind them.
Proxime mich negligentes ferunt. Omnes nos peccantes fims. Et omnes nos edem fims. omnis nos peccatores suns. Venite domum meum, lut simile somnium, et pulvere simile quotidianum, corporebo, te judico.
Yep, that is most certainly Latin. Don't ask me if it's classical or Vulgate. I honestly won't be able to tell you. Aoko fought against the pain in her back as she ran through the mirrored corridor. She dragged Sojiro by the hand.
青崎、傷は
別に背骨がしびれてる程度。
Ugh.
内臓は平気だし、出血もないみたい。
You're gonna need some Tylenol in the morning, though. Maybe some icy hot. She cursed inwardly at how much of a mess she felt, though. Unlike Sojiro, Aoko did not run into any transparent walls. Thanks not to superior sight, but rather preparation, she hammered the layout of the building into her memory.
平気ってわかるのか？
そりゃ自分の体だもの。身体管理は基礎中の基礎よ。
Aoko's matter-of-fact answer contrasted with Sojiro's nervous questioning. The corridor grew shorter with each and every left turn. At first, they were able to advance in a straight line for about 100 feet at a time. But by now, they were forced to turn a corner every 50 feet or so.
あいつはあの夜の
Different one.
多分ね。同じタイプだと思う。貴重なオートマタを惜しげもなく使い捨てるなんて、よっぽどお金持ちなんだろうけど。
Sojiro furrowed his brows. He was grateful that she was answering his questions, but baffled by the strange words she was using.
青崎ストップ。もう随分走ったぞ。あいつは曲がり角一つ分向こうだ。少し休もう。
His words suggested that he was still concerned about her injuries. Aoko shook her head in irritation.
あの距離を狙ってくる相手に通路一つ分のリードは無意味よ。せめて
Sojiro nodded. That matter settled, he asked.
なんで俺を連れて行ってるんだ？
逃げ
Yeah,
ら
I
れた
could
く
have
ない
just
か
let
ら
it kill him. You know, fucking two birds, one stone. Answering curtly, Aoko glared at her naive prey. The two of them headed for the next corner. Legs began to slow as they rounded one more. Aoko rubbed her back as she tried to catch her breath. Though Aoko had insisted that she was fine, it appeared to have been bravado. Even the usually clueless Sojiro felt the desperation they were in. Felt the desperation? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. He stood behind Aoko with his arms folded. While they had a moment, he tried to make sense of everything. Fucking good luck with that one, bud. First, Aoko had nearly killed him. Though he was saved at the last possible second, it was by the strange, stretchy woman Aoko had burned to ashes 2 nights prior. He could barely make it out that night, but he considered it a her because it looked female. The woman's attack wounded Aoko's back and forced her to flee. Aoko had taken Sojiro with her, claiming that the reason she did so was to prevent her prey from escaping. In other words,
青崎はまだ諦めてないんだな。
当たり前よ。あんなやつ仮に2体と半分始末してもあんた用の余力は残せるわ。
her tone was sharp, but even Sojiro could see that she was struggling to stay confident. The damage to her body was too much to afford her any optimism. Still, the fury in her eyes refused to accept her circumstances.
中がところどころショートしてる。あの右腕は回路を混戦させるジャミングってわけね。
Oh no, it gave her the raspberry. Though the proper response would have been for her to tremble in fear, she did nothing but shake her fists in anger. The disruption of formulae was only supposed to work on absolute beginners. If it had been her roommate, the arm would have been repelled the instant it hit her, and the attacker's circuits burned out rather than her own. Attempting to establish a link to the magic circuits of another mage was like presenting your heart on a silver platter. It would be of no use in a battle against a superior mage. And yet, her adversary had been designed to do just that. Coupled with the attacks on areas of Misaki under Aoko's jurisdiction these last few weeks, was a clear statement from the enemy, who as of 2 days ago, had revealed itself as a fellow mage. In other words, the puppet saw Aoko as no threat at all.
敵ながら正確な判断だこと。
While she was still angry, the whirlwind of emotions within her started to fade. Face was that of a hunter far beyond her years. Also, I'm surprised you've been running around in high heels like that. Oof, your feet.
なんか
Especially in a dilapidated thing like this. You could like catch that on like a tile that's sticking up and just eat shit and fucking twist your ankle. I know those are high boots, but I doubt they have much support.
まあね、あんたの時は遊びが入ってたし。
Sojo is not sure whether to be happy or sad at that.
わからないことだらけで何を聞いていいかわからないんだけど、一つだけいいか。
I mean, you can ask it. Whether it gets answered is a different story. Aoko didn't respond. Her eyes were focused on the darkness before them. Silence was heavy, and the darkness was like a noose closing in on them. But Sojo continued in spite of her indifference.
青崎はあいつも殺すのか。
Silence fell over them. It's as if the gloom was pulling them in. Well, it's not really killing, because it's an inanimate object without life, so... No response. Their breathing was the only sounds echoing in the dim corridor. It's more just breaking it. There stood Sojiro, forcing her to confront her sins, and the magician girl who continued to ignore him. They spent a few seconds, seemingly frozen in time.
そう。それがあなたのキーワードみたいね。
Aoko whispered in a lifeless tone. Her sigh was tinged with both resignation and contempt.
何？
独り言よ、忘れて。それと、言っとくけど、あいつは人間じゃないわ。
Yeah, so there's no ethical qualm in killing it.
信じられないだろうけど、自分の意志で動く人形なの。この前のも、今のやつもね。
Sojiro nodded as he processed the information. Do you know what a puppet is? Not only did he not doubt her story, but he seemed to have accepted it at face value.
なんか落ち着いてるわね、あなた。
Well, you just explained the situation, so yeah.
まさかもう何が何だかわからないからあまり考えないことにしてるだけだ。ただ人形に関しては別にどうということはない。
Yeah, it didn't really look too human.
もしかして他でも自動人形を見たことあるとか？
Well, it wasn't wearing clothes.
都会の人形って
Yeah,
ああいうものじゃないのか？
like in the store. She barely stopped herself from falling to her knees. Of course, how could she have forgotten? She was dealing with a bona fide natural-born moron. As a student who transferred from the isolation of the mountain like an endangered species, his utter lack of common sense rendered anything miraculous as mundane. If automobiles were moving hunks of metal, then moving puppets were nothing to write home about. Wait, that meant... To him, the incident from the other night hadn't been extraordinary at all. Might have even assumed it was an everyday occurrence in the city.
まいった。いっぺん頭の中覗いてみたいっていうか、ほんと、ここまで来ると感心するわ。調子が狂うのも当然だった。普通は私に襲われた時点でもっと違う反応をするはずなのに。化け物とか、お化けとかさ。でもあなたにとっては、そういうこともある。で済まされてたわけなんだ。なんかバカみたいね。
Just a constant stream of, oh, so that's how it is. Her strained face returned to normal for a moment. It hit her. There had been another way to handle this without anyone getting hurt. But the damage had already been done. There were no do-overs in life, nor should there be. Her own mistaken assumptions had sent the situation spiraling out of control. But now that Sojiro was involved, she had to make sure that her secret was safe with him. Even if there had been another, better option, that ship had sailed. Human relationships were utterly driven by mutual misunderstandings. Like tapestries woven from mismatched intentions. Break time was over. There stood Aoko Ozaki and Sojiro Suzuki. The first idle conversation they had had since first meeting had come to an end. Not that they had a choice in the matter. It was the jarring murmuring from around the corner that cut it short.
Nemo mef nus meminit, vidroit extinct sest. Initio eraberamos dom rebimus dolores sunt. Nemo adiuvat.
Yeah, that's basically me every day I wake up. The enemy was just around the corner, visible in the mirrors parallel to it.
Yeah, you
couldn't have had this talk while, like, walking in order to, like, maintain distance or at least a light jog. Oh. In contrast to Aoko's elegant blues, its lights were a malicious red. There was a momentary flash of light before she even extended her arm. But the instant she saw the enemy, her dormant feelings erupted once more. She channeled all her pent-up anger and shunted it into her right arm. Shunted? I don't think I've ever seen that word. But I can guess what it meant. The fog that filled the corridor was no magical weaving, but rather a barrier of raw energy. It was equivalent to setting ablaze the 3 buckets of gasoline that created a wall of fire in hopes that it would stop an arrow in flight. If the puppet had attacked with its arm, it could have pierced such a wall easily, but because it had loosed curses with no definitive form, the wall of energy repelled the attack. While it was a huge waste of magical energy, it was the only means Aoko had to protect herself in that very moment. Unfortunately, its protection was reserved for Aoko alone. Sojiro held his hands to his mouth. While the curse had been weakened to the point where Aoko could no longer feel it, it had plenty of effect on Sojiro, who was not a mage. My man has 0 magical resistance. As if it understood this fact, the puppet turned its gaze from Aoko to the unanticipated human behind her. Yeah, it's my job to kill him. Enraged, she swung her arm forward once again. The blue light formed a wall to block the gander for a scant few seconds. It was enough of an opening to exploit. Just as Aoko was forming the wall, the puppet pointed its right arm at her face and... Before the rocket of death could be fired, Sojiro scooped her up and into his arms. How he mustered the strength to do so was a mystery, but he turned his back on the puppet and took off running. He was a nimble sprinter, resembling a deer leaping across obstacles. Sojiro rounded 2 more corners, ignoring whatever complaints Aoko was making, and eventually stopped in the middle of the 2nd floor. He set her down. Surprised you could, navigate your way, without her leading. Considering you don't know the layout. Sojiro's shoulders heaved as he caught his breath. As light as she was, running while carrying someone else would make anyone winded. She looked up at him, incomprehensible. In incomprehension. Made no sense to her. If he had the stamina to pick her up and run, surely he could have stood up and escaped when he had been downed earlier. His words were unfiltered as ever. Though in this moment, fighting for their lives, he lacked some of his usual absent-mindedness. Though he may have turned away because he regretted saying it out loud, his words spoke volumes. For some reason, it pained Aoko to see him like that.
唐突に気分が悪いんだが、
Yeah, you've been running really hard. Also, you got fucking hit with a gander shot.
あの赤い光も、その、
ええ、魔術の類よ。ガンド打ちって言ってね。
Mm-hmm.
北欧の呪詛の一つ。魔術回路のある私には効かないけど、
You might
抵
have
抗
like
の
a
ないあな
flu
たに効
tomorrow.
果てきめんみたいね。
なんだ、青崎には効かないのか。じゃあ、危ないのはあの腕だけだな。
Yeah, getting fucking rocket punched in the jaw is a threat to most people. Aoko had no idea why he was relieved, but she gritted her teeth and fought down the urge to snap at him. There was no use in yelling at a time like this. Above all, she felt it would have been petty in the extreme to voice her annoyance right now.
そうね。注意するのは伸ばしてくる腕だけ。大した相手じゃないわ、やっぱり。
This time it was not false bravado. Such an enemy would normally be a breeze for Aoko Ozaki. But her shameful negligence had led to the disruption of her magic circuits, making her even less formidable than her enemy. At this point, Aoko had no way of attacking. The only option left to her was to wait for it to expend all its magical energy, but its perpetual curse mechanism made it a non-starter. This game attack would not end until one of them was dead. She realized that she was in the same position she had cornered Sojiro in earlier. She glanced at her right arm. She could not imagine how she had gotten into such a mess with her magical energy at more than half of its capacity. This had to be karma for having enjoyed toying with Sojiro earlier.
呆れた。いるところにはいるものね。
Now learn from your
神様。
fucking past mistakes, no more villain acts. She grumbled under her breath as she shifted her focus. She had the fuel for the fire, but not the igniter. And that killing machine would chase her until the end of time if need be. What she should do next was blindingly clear. She had to get back to normal.
青崎、
Yeah, you need to
ごめん、
fucking cast
考
a
え事してた。
dispel.
確か。よし、合ってる。しずきくん、そこに横道あるのわかる？
Aoko pointed, but he could see nothing but the walls of the corridor. For one thing, the floor had nothing but left turns, and Aoko was pointing to the right.
2階は中心まで行くと1階に降りる階段があるんだけど、それは私が壊したから使えないの。
Okay. Gonna advance the text. Hello? Oh, my controller died? Weird. It's full. Huh.
けど、ここの作りも意地が悪くてね。よく見れば、右に曲がる通路もあるのよ。あとは注意して探せば、1階の階段までショートカットできる。悪いけど、一人で行って。
Aoko turned her back to Sojiro and started walking. Walking in the opposite direction of the escape route and down the long corridor towards the puppet in pursuit.
あいつは無差別だから、ここで壊さないといけない。魔術師は魔術師同士で争うのはいいんだけど、みだりに一般人に手を出しちゃいけないって
Yeah, but
決
it
ま
sure
りが
does
ある。
seem to happen a fucking lot.
あいつの目的は私のわけだし、結果がどうあれ、すっきりするでしょ。
If Aoko won, the puppet would be destroyed. If Aoko lost, its objective would be complete and it would shut down. Either way, them going their separate ways would mean Sojiro survived. This is what Aoko meant. Though she explained it as if the events were happening to two totally different people.
運が良ければ入り口までたどり着けるわ。それじゃあ、また明日ね。
Even Sojiro could tell she was just trying to act tough. But she had already disappeared around the corner by the time he thought to stop her.
さて。
Mentally, Aoko bemoaned the disaster she was in. The quality of this puppet was on a completely different level compared to the one from the park 2 days ago. An auto-intancation perpetual motion machine was a rarity in and of itself, But this puppet was also equipped for battle with its extending arms and Gander projecting crystalline eyes. It was a first-class product, and to put on the market, would sell for hundreds of millions of yen. Although, that was only when factoring in its value as an antique. For the purpose of combat, it would have made far more sense to mobilize a significantly less expensive familiar. To use such a precious commodity as a tool for murder marked this puppet's master as a completely different breed of crazy from the enemies she had faced up until now.
Vivo insomne, solitare putresque inferis. Ictius mers obitus dies, et mers nativus dies. Theoberum.
来たわね。
Up yours too, bud. A sound of a cackling music box filled the air. The automata. What's the other way people say it? Automata, there we go. Animated by its own curses, approached. The corridor measured approximately 30 feet in length. Aoko lay in wait around a corner further down the hall, anticipating the puppet's appearance. It was not to buy Sojiro time to escape. Far from it. Aoko had concluded that she couldn't make a break for it under the current circumstances. Even if she did try to escape, and by some miracle made it out of the House of Mirrors, that was as far as she would go. Outside, there was no cover. Aoko would quickly be overtaken and skewered from behind. As long as her magecraft was disabled, escape was impossible. Instead, she chose to force the enemy back. The situation was not the most favorable, neither was the puppets. Though this narrow hall gave Aoko no place to run, it in turn prevented the puppet from reaching full speed. That was the weak point of this machine. Automata... I'm always going to mess up that word because I'll always feel like I'm saying it wrong no matter which way I say it. It's like data or fucking data. The automata of its era had a tendency to struggle with minute changes in speed.
セット。
She flowed energy into her shorted circuits. Her blood flow and magical energy supply were unstable. It would be difficult to construct a formula in this state. All she could do was harden her right arm by imbuing it with as much energy as she could. Doing so turned her arm into an improvised weapon like a hammer or a bat, assuming she could manage to get into close combat range. This was the best she could do. Just a little beginner strengthening magic, you know. Newbie shit. All she needed now was a plan of attack. The question wasn't what weapon to use, but how to use the weapon she had. The simplest way would be to use the mirror's reflections to hide and rush the puppet from its blind spot, except for one major problem. To not have a sense of sight in the first place. The puppet's view of the world around it didn't stem from visual feedback, but from mapping the topography of its surroundings. In theory, it was the same as a bat's echolocation. The environment could be measured based on the emissions and return of high-frequency sound waves. It's like LADAR. Those chants served as sensor pulses. As far as the puppet was concerned, the mirrors were no better than transparent panes, making even the thought of an ambush laughable.
近づけば近づくほど、よりリアルに察知さ
Every
れ
time
る。
I see thought, though, through, it melts my brain because at a glance I can never fucking tell them apart.
ガンドを撃ってくるなら、フィンの一撃ぐらい隠してるわよね。
Cool. I don't know what a fin shot is. Gander was Scandinavian in origin, and considering its simplicity, highly versatile. It was most effective at impairing a target's health by pointing a finger. As a single-action magecraft, it was limited to only causing illness, but there was a secret technique said to be the greatest mystery of the Gander shot. The fin shot. It could do more than cause simple illness. It was a deadly curse that could stop the heart. The wound on her back set her nerves on fire. An unarmed girl and a deadly automaton. It was clear that she would be the one destined for death. She considered her slim chances of survival when... Oh, that's spooky. The vision sent chills down her spine. Quietly, using everything she could to clamp down on this feeling, Aoko faced her all too familiar illusion. She clenched her teeth to keep them from making a deafening clatter. But there, the sensation of fingers crawling up her neck. Behind her, the specter stared and laughed. This alone made Aoko want to bolt. Top of it all, when Aoko tried to mentally simulate the coming fight, she estimated a 2 to 10 chance of dying in the first 5 seconds. 20%. At times, her predictions were harsher than reality. If Aoko fought the puppet 10 times, she would die twice. She could not stop herself from visualizing her own corpse. She imagined herself collapsing, crumpling under the puppet's curse. Her eyeballs swollen like a blowfish, blood and other fluids oozing from every orifice. 1 in 5, 1 in 5, 1 in 5. A 1 in 10 chance of death was bad enough, but a 1 in 5? It drove her crazy. Aoko forced down her heart as it tried to escape from her mouth. Taking in a deep breath, she peered at her own reflection. She thought back to that white night half a year ago. This, she decided, was nothing compared to that. 6 months ago, at the Kuonji estate. The Hound of White Roses. The Wandersnatch? Okay. The Wandersnatch, that appeared from within the thick fog, killed Aoko 100 times out of 10.
Mea animae brutalis, autem mea futura necata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est.
The dark curse shattered Aoko's daydream. It was only 30 feet away. The puppet rounded the corner. Either side stood in the shadows, their forms indistinct. The puppet gave no warning. Without preamble, it swiftly fired a Gondar barrage. Just as Aoko planned, the curses fizzled out as they hit her mist-like barrier of magical energy. The protection would only last a few seconds, giving her just enough time to... Its stretchable spear sprang towards Aoko's face.
Bingo!
The lethal weapon grazed her cheek. All her experience analyzing puppet attack patterns gave her the wherewithal to evade the attack by a hair's breadth. It was one thing if a puppeteer was pulling the strings, but autonomous dolls had their limitations. Aoko had bet everything on this killing machine following a predefined template. The puppet would use a given attack for a given range, and she could adjust her tactics to that. Before its arm had a chance to fully retract, she charged the puppet. It was a risky gamble, but her overall chances were slim to begin with. The scales tipped in her favor. If her predictions were correct, there were 2 ways she would die. One was from a fin shot fired at this range. You gonna advance the text there? Hello? And the other was if the puppet's attack pattern was beyond her ability to foresee. Instantaneous mass transfer, otherwise known as mass displacement. Immediately after Aoko dodged the puppet's arm, something smashed into her abdomen. Just fucking bowled over. Ugh. The head-on collision from its shoulder felt like a rocket. But where had the ability to propel itself come from? Puppets like this were not built to have the ability to jet around like that. Unless it fucking reeled itself in, got its arm latched in the wall and just woo, ziplined. Doing everything in her power to stay conscious in spite of the pain, Aoko could just make out what had happened.
今の推進力じゃな
Hey,
く
look
て
at that. I'm so smart.
牽引力
Yes, the puppet's arm had not returned to its body. It was lodged in the wall and reeled itself in from the other direction.
そんなのありか
It might not have even meant to. Could have just been stuck. Swallowing her surprise, she hastily pulled herself back up. Her abdomen, specifically her diaphragm, had been dealt a significant blow. The attack left her disoriented. Thankfully, the puppet was surprisingly lightweight. Bones and organs were intact, and she had sustained no life-threatening damage. She was having a hard time breathing, however. She was shaken, though she managed to keep her calm. In another 2 seconds, she'd be back on her feet. No, that was 2 seconds too long. She told herself to calm down, but she was already calm. That only briefly losing her, she'd only briefly lost her bearings. She was fine. She could recover her breath and her vision later if only her body would move.
Intellectus non necessaris est, piesque escat. Un nostro sentiabulat fit. Ratio fix tantum est. Dolores nicium cerebrum fit.
Above her, Aoko could hear the warped noises of a powerful force.
し動けでもどっち
She could once more feel the touch of death.
Vis salvatio, vis salvatio, vis salvatio.
The puppet was so close that Aoko could reach out and touch it. That also meant that it could reach out and kill Aoko.
こいつの右腕の死角に入れる
By intuition alone, Aoko rolled over the puppet's right flank. Its arm was still embedded within the wall. From here, it could not attack. She had made the right decision, and her dizziness faded.
Intellectus non necessaris est, piesque escat. Un nostro sentiabulat fit. Ratio fix tantum est. Dolores nicium cerebrum fit.
Aoko pulled herself back up. It was her turn. Yeah, creepy. It's kind of got like your face. It's only an instant. In this labyrinth of mirrors, she saw the image of herself.
Vis salvatio.
Blinding, brilliant light flashed. Lacerations appeared across the walls. Very last moment, Aoko managed to thicken the magical energy running through her veins into a primitive form of magecraft resistance. It just barely saved her life from what must have been the puppet's ace in the hole. The puppet bore a striking resemblance to Aoko. Did I say like striking? This powerful curse was not satisfied with stopping Aoko's heart, but destroying her entire being. Aoko did not even have the time to be shocked. This was her chance for a counterattack. The puppet's balance was unsteady, its right arm still embedded in the wall. I just gotta fucking club its head like a baby seal. Aoko prepared to give its defenseless body a strong kick, but her knees buckled and she collapsed into a heap on the floor.
Bebo in somno, solitare putris cum feris. Ictius meus obitus tius, et meus natibus tius, Teo beam.
Sudden nausea and lightheadedness overcame Aoko. Body temperature began to rapidly lower.
しまこいつ呪いをばらまいてるんだった
She noticed too late. The puppet's curses circled the hall. The curse chant that the puppet used as a source of power doubled as a defense mechanism, crippling those who drew near with illness. She bore the full brunt of the entire time she was in close proximity to it. Though Aoko had magic circuits, she was succumbing just as Sojiro had. Languidly, she forced her deteriorating body to jump back.
負けるか
With all the energy she could muster, muster, she forced her way past the exhaustion caused by the curse. I wish I could force my way past my fucking mush mouth. However, Ako's blood pressure took a steep nosedive. Not from the curse-induced anemia, but from what appeared in front of her. They stood in perfect harmony. In front of Aoko was the automaton that shared her face, its left arm held out like an arrow. The deadly weapon shot forward and honed in on her heart. Then, a moment before it made contact,
危ない。
that was a rather calm exclamation there. The moment she heard that fearless voice, completely out of place in this storm of violence, Ako's body was pulled forcefully to one side. Once again, the extending arm cut through empty air. While the puppet quickly retracted its left arm, Sojiro took the brief opportunity to take Aoko by the hand and flee at full speed. Don't worry, guys. I'll just I'll QA your own visual novel for you. Fucking expect my bug list and, like, spell checks to come in the mail. Sojiro ran through the corridor as fast as he could, only stopping when he had put enough distance between them and the puppet.
その、考えてみると、
Though he had saved her, she looked angry rather than grateful. This did not keep Sojiro from saying his piece.
明日はどうも忙しいみたいなんだ。
Yeah, if we could, like, wrap this up. In other words, let's finish this today. A rather awkward proposal. Aoko remained silent. She was also rather angry. Not that she could not figure out what made him tick. Nor because he'd returned after escaping. Not even because he was spouting his typically airheaded lines. It was, she supposed, that instant. The fact that when he grabbed her hand, her mind had gone completely blank. Aoko found it unforgivable. Which beckoned the response.
あなた、正気？
In the heat of the moment, she blurted it out before she could stop herself.
それとも自殺願望でもあったわけ？私もあいつも、あんたなんか殺す対象に過ぎないのよ。
Yeah, but it didn't die, so, you know, it'll buff.
少
All
なく
comes
と
out
も
in the wash.
恩を売る相手じゃない。言っとくけど、私、助けられたぐらいで曲がる信念は持ち合わせていないから。
Son. Sojiro nodded, clearly unperturbed.
青崎がそんな可愛らしいもんじゃないのは、この夜だけで骨身に染みてるよ。
No mercy. She found herself slightly offended.
けど君は勘違いをしてるから少し正そう。あいつの狙いは青崎だけじゃない。君だけじゃなく、俺も殺す気だと思う。
Oh, yeah, no witnesses and all. She was having none of it. Her eyes shot daggers his way.
話は最後まで聞く。どうしてかっていうと、1階の入り口あるだろ？あの細長い通路。
What, was it blocked off?
なんでかあそこから先に進めないんだ。
Yep.
逃げたくても逃げ出せなくて、仕方なく戻ってきた。
Aoko's eyes widened ever so slightly in amazement. Not out of shock, but rather admiration that her enemy would go to such lengths.
それに、さっきので完全に敵扱いされた。あの人形、こっちをじろっと
I
睨
think
んで
that's
きた
just
し。
its face.
いや、一瞬でよく見えなかったけど、生きた心地しなかったな。青崎も気をつけた方がいい。多分よっぽど怖い顔をして
Oh
い
yeah,
る
its
に違い
face
ない
is
ぞ。
horrifying. One of the worst things I've ever seen in my life.
それはご親切にどうも。
なんでこれはもう他人事じゃないんだ。青崎と人形。結論として、どっ
Yeah,
ちが勝っても俺は殺されてしまうんじゃないか？
probably rather be killed by Aoko than some weird puppet thing.
そうね。そこまでやってるなら、目撃者は消すでしょうね。私みたいに。
I mean, it's what you did / are doing.
だろ？でも、俺はあいつには殺されたくない。
え？
Yeah, he doesn't know her. It. We need to ask the puppet what gender it prefers, or what its pronouns are. His words were decisive. As Aoko looked up at him, she could swear he was trying to encourage her. It was then that she realized. Sojiro was looking even worse than before.
ちょっと待って。大丈夫なのあなた。
I mean, probably not.
ああ、醤油を一升瓶飲むよりはマシではないか。
Ugh. That's a lot of sodium. He tried to make light of the situation, but his forehead was clearly drenched in sweat.
そうか。さっき人形に近づいたから。
Oh yeah, and he has no resistance. How could he possibly be able to withstand a curse that made even Aoko nauseous? She bit her lip, annoyed at herself for not noticing this earlier. Sojiro was such an airhead that she hadn't even paused to consider his plight.
下で隠れていようとか思わなかったの？その方がどう考えても安全でしょ？
Oh, is there any way out from the basement? She really could not understand him at all.
それは青崎が言うセリフじゃないな。でもまあ、長話をしている時間もない。そろそろ追い
Yeah,
ついて
again,
くるからだ。
walk and talk. Turned around to look down the corridor. The cackling sound of a music box could be heard creeping forth from the darkness. Keep saying cackling when it's crackling.
さっき1階にて考えたんだ。君がやられて
Not that
も
it
俺
makes
は
much
殺され
difference
る。
with those words.
なら、
It's not very
まず
important.
奴をどうにかするべきだ。
あなた、何が言いたいの？
Yeah, you got a plan? She asked a question to which she already knew the answer. She did it to put him to the test. If he wavered even a little, she would have killed him where he stood.
提案。あいつをやっつけるのに協力したら、俺のことは見逃してくれる？
助けられたぐらいじゃ信念は曲げないって言ったでしょ？それに、あなたに何ができるっていうの？
No, he can run interference.
それは青崎が考えてくれ。得意だろ、そういうの。
The commander who had the overall picture was responsible for delegating roles to their teammates. It was futile to depend on someone who was unable to grasp the situation or evaluate the enemy's strength. Sojiro was proud to share that he knew this. You spoke the truth. Aoko was the only one who knew both Sojiro and the automata. That was why he pointed out the following. Her orders to the best of his ability was the only thing he could do. It may have seemed as though Sojiro had surrendered his capacity for self-thought, but in fact, in accepting that he was helpless, he was in fact giving Aoko his complete trust.
じゃあ、私の指示に 100% 従うってこと？
ああ。それに、これは恩とか義理の話じゃない。一人だと分が悪いから二人でかかるだけだ。善意でも好意でもない。取引って言わないか、こういうの。
His eyes sparkled, as if this was bartering in its truest form.
まったく。
This child must have learned that from Tobimaru, Aoko thought. Though she refused to let him see it, underneath she cracked a smile. Sure, he had gotten the best of her just now, but there were times when defeat was not the worst outcome in the world.
労働と報酬ってわけね。それなら理にかなってる。うん。言いたくないけど。
What? She relaxed her shoulders and sighed. Her face cracked into a wicked smile, as if her fears had suddenly washed away.
それ、結構私の好みよ。
What, you like bossing people around? Aoko repaid Sojiro's trust in equal measure.
結構きついかもね。あなたの役目。
Aoko warned Sojiro, moving as fast as she could without her footfalls causing a din of noise. Extra hard to, run quiet in heels. Ugh. Sojiro maintained near the center of the spiral maze on the second floor.
実を言うと、もう一つ用意しておいた仕掛けがあるの。自分でもやりすぎだって呆れたもんだけど、 あなたがここに来るのが遅かったから。
お仕掛けって俺用の？
Sojiro tilted his head like a squirrel as Aoko freely discussed the final ace up her sleeve.
地下の柱に着火型のちょっとした魔
Yeah,
術
knock
式
the
を
whole
刻ん
thing
でおいた
down.
の。中心の柱に点火することで連鎖的に他の柱に仕掛けた魔術も起動する。ジャミングを食らう前に作ったものだから直接魔力を叩き込めば一気にこういくわ。
Sojiro was a little unsettled by how unclear that last bit was.
青崎、
They didn't sound very
こう
confident.
じゃわからない。できるだけ明
Didn't
確
sound
に
very confident.
どこまで爆破する気だったのか白状してくれ。あと、もしかして俺、早まったか？
いや、その単なる保険っていうか、
Yeah.
追いかけっこの途中であんたを見失ったらいっそ建物ごと爆破しちゃおうかなって。
It was her policy to be thorough to the end, after all. She laughed in embarrassment, saying it out loud, though.
いくらなんでも徹底しすぎてる。
Faced with Aoko's cruelty, Sojiro forgot about the situation at hand and protested from the bottom of his heart.
何よ、いいじゃない。そのおかげでなんとかなりそうなんだから。
She shot back. Aoko dashed down the corridor, mumbling things that probably would have sent Sojiro packing if he heard them. Strategy was simple. Aoko would use the escape route to the right and avoid the puppet while making her way down to the basement. Upon reaching the center pillar, she would infuse the formula she had prepared with magical energy and escape. Once ignited, it would take about a minute for the chain reaction to spread throughout the whole house of mirrors, and another minute for the building to collapse. She would be cutting a little close, but because she had committed the maze to memory, she was sure she could make it out in time. Aoko assumed that the chain reaction caused by the pillar would clear the barrier that the puppet placed at the entrance. Really? You're sure of it? And even if it was strong enough to withstand the blast, it would not be able to stay standing once the foundations buckled. Sojiro's escape was assured as long as the formula in the basement was activated. Next came the most important part. The automaton was at a disadvantage in the obstacle-laden house of mirrors and was unable to move at full speed. If it was near the center of the second floor when the building collapsed, it would be caught up and crushed by it. So the problem was keeping the puppet on the second floor until Aoko could make it down to the basement.
当てにしたからね、しずきくん。せめて
Yep,
3分
you
ぐ
got
ら
a
いは
kite.
引きつけて。
Ideally, we'd be able to keep it busy until she could activate the formula. If that failed to work, him luring it down to the first floor would be the next best thing. She understood perfectly well the danger she was putting Sojiro in, but his lucky streak and running speed were nothing to scoff at.
ただ逃げるだけなら、もしかしてとんでもないことをしてくれるかも、あいつ。
Yeah, just fucking draw aggro and kite while Aoko does the fucking raid mechanic. Aoko made her way through the hidden passage of the maze, her hopes pinned on Sojiro. Meanwhile, well out of earshot, Sojiro was readying himself for another desperate chase. He calmed his beating heart using a method of his own making. What mattered most was that he remained calm. The plan was simple enough. Aoko's orders were succinct and easy to understand.
10メートルぐらいの距離を保って、できるだけゆっくり通路を3、4周すること。横道は鏡のつなぎ目で覚えて。ここなら左回りで6、3、7、2枚目にあるから、そこ。
It was essentially a looping marathon. As long as Sojiro maintained a distance of the puppet's extended arm and just enough that she could continue to track him, she should continue chasing him indefinitely. Simple though the task was, Sojiro was putting his life on the line as bait. And then there was the final order to run as fast as he could towards the exit when the building began to sway.
結構じゃなくて、かなりきついんじゃないかな。
Yeah, just a smidge. Also, all that running, you should probably lose that fucking sweater, my guy. You must be, soaked through. He nervously stuck his head out from around the corner. He could hear the sound of the music box from the other side of the corridor. First, he had to make eye contact with it, then head through the shortcut to the right and begin their game of tag. He spotted it and braced himself. Closer, closer. Fearing that her arm could fly at him at any moment, he went over Aoko's instructions in his head.
What?
However, he could not quite remember which pane led to the first hidden passage. The third? The sixth? The ninth? No. He was sure that that was mistaken. He was confident that he had it memorized moments ago, but his nerves had gotten the best of him, and his head was now spinning. Then, Sojiro realized that the sound of his pursuer was beginning to grow distant, and at an incredible speed. Oh.
Nani?
I didn't know it could do that. The unusual silhouette of the puppet astonished him. Before it had taken the form of a beautiful girl, now it made a bizarre transformation, and returned to the first floor to pursue her primary target.
いや、それは...
Oh yeah, this is bad. Sojiro was no longer sure what to do. With not even the time to mourn his failure, the puppet had vanished out of sight. I'll be of help. Just let me go. So he had said. Now he could not follow through.
さて、自分はこれからどうしよう?
Yeah, now it's time for some independent action. Oh. Alone, he tilted his head in frustration. He spoke into the darkness as if Aoko would be there to answer him. At that very moment, having arrived on the first floor, Aoko quickly understood what had transpired above her. She did not even have to strain her ears to hear the puppet. Even during its heyday, its attraction had never made the sounds like the one she was hearing coming towards her now. It was a sound of despair, as a horde of monstrous hedgehogs were scraping their way past the mirrors in her direction. Ah!
ドジ、3分どころか10秒持たないってどういうことよ。
Rather than buying her time, Sojiro had in fact stolen hers. She dreamed of cursing him for failing to fulfill his one job.
複数の足音ってことは2足から多脚に切り替えたのね。
The echoes made it sound like the footsteps of dozens of feet. To Aoko, it sounded like a giant six-legged spider tearing its way down the corridor. Well, if it had 6 legs, it wouldn't be a spider. It was little wonder that it was so much faster than before. Its perception of its surroundings through echolocation was of particular use in the darkness. Compared to sight-dependent humans, this automaton was far better equipped to navigate its way through the labyrinth of mirrors. If it could not keep pace earlier, it was because it was in its bipedal mode of movement. What? If it could not keep pace earlier, it was because its bipedal mode of movement was not up to the task. But the stability provided by multiple legs gave it speed that far exceeded that of any human. Her thoughts spun out as she tried to come up with a plan B. All she knew for sure was that this was a pivotal moment. If she continued standing still, she had seconds left at most. Even in her current state, she knew she could easily neutralize the bounded field blocking the entrance without casting a spell. All she had to do was pour a little of her own energy into it. Hello? You can advance the text there, Joy-Con? I don't know what's doing that. It's just in my hand. It's not like it's far away either. Like, I have it fucking 3.5 feet, maybe, from the Switch. Maybe it's the way I'm holding it. I was pushing down on, like, the buttons on the top too much. Aoko could sprint with all her might for a little more than 3 minutes. The puppet had far more stamina than she did. She could only come up with 3 options. The first was to escape through the exit in front of her. The second was to hide herself somewhere within the far more complicated first floor. The third was to run into the basement and be stuck like a rat in a trap.
なんだ、考えるまでもない。
She had made her decision with zero hesitation, moving her stiff legs again with determined strength. The oncoming storm was almost upon her. To the basement we go! Her resolve firm, she turned and ran, descending into the darkness. No matter what, a finale should be glorious. This would be the Mirror Castle's final scene. 2 humans and a puppet. A young sorceress ran towards the subterranean heart of the castle, while an autonomous antique chased its prey into the depths of a demonic dungeon. A minute later, a faint, blue charge would ripple through the castle. This was the main pillar in the deepest depths of the basement. The pillar itself was not there to support the castle structure, but it would serve nicely as a symbol to which the girl thrust her fist with all her magical energy. Sure. Timer's going. That was the blow that would bring down the castle. She imagined the scene as she threw the punch, a scene that would soon become reality. It was a simple ignition magecraft, meant to release the condensed magical energy engraved into the 4 pillars that formed the foundation of the structure. Using electricity as a switch meant virtually instantaneous activation. That's called a solenoid. Swift and elegant. A hammer of destruction descended upon the castle of dreams that had stubbornly resisted its fate for 2 years. Can't escape crossing fates? It was almost a joyous sound. And so, the lifeless and abandoned castle of mirrors set the stage for its final and most spectacular performance. Aoko's magical energy became an electric charge that activated the magecraft formula engraved into the pillars. The chain reaction would lead to the castle's destruction.
ご苦労様。でも、思ってたよりくたびれてたのね。
Don't get sentimental now. The plaza in the center of the basement. Aoko tried to steady her breathing while rotating her magic crest at full speed. She wreathed her arms in blue light, fully aware that she would no longer activate another formula. She could no longer activate another formula. Ain't got no more gas. Her labored breathing refused to settle. She stood at the center of the basement. Without being spotted even once, she had managed to make it all the way to the center pillar. It was a 100-meter dash in 13 seconds flat, undoubtedly a new personal record. She spurred on, her weakened heart, knowing full well the fate that awaited her.
入れば追ってくる。地下に行けば逃げられない。当然よね。最後まで逃げ回ろうなんて虫のいい話だった。
Yup. End of the line. Hindsight was 2020. The castle was only a minute away from collapsing completely. If they stayed here, they would both be crushed by the rubble. Puppet certainly did not care. With no life of its own, its sole concern was the elimination of its target, Aoko Aozaki. Indeed, the enemy had been willing to die from the start. She resented her own lack of resolve. It wasn't like her to tuck tail and run from an opponent that didn't fear death.
Vivo insomni, solitare putresco inferis. Ictius meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies. Teobeam.
そもそも自爆覚悟じゃないあれ。
Yep.
六足歩行とフィンの一撃は使いすぎよ。もう呪詛による魔力補給じゃ間に合わない。
Impressive if you can tell that just from looking. Such a perpetual motion device was only as good as its ability to regulate its energy consumption. Using so many functions at once meant it was burning through fuel quickly and losing the ability to process the curses that powered it. It was using up all the functions it had been given to achieve its aim. This was the pride of a tool, if such things could have ego. Those endowed with sentience could never hope to understand. A beast born to do nothing but run would burn any human who faced its resolve.
ほんともったいない。こういう無茶をするのは姉貴だけかと思ってたけど、いるところにはいるもんね。
Yeah, But Aoko did not intend to sacrifice play here. She respected her adversary now. She was done regretting her choices. There was no time to waste.
行くわよ。ここできっかり。
Aoko had every intention of paying it back double for what it had done to her. The energy Aoko had accumulated exploded out of her right leg. She aimed for a single thing, a head-on attack. The enemy's response was a curse to crush her heart. A curse that would rend Aoko's heart and destroy itself in the process. As soon as she saw it, Aoko kicked the floor as hard as she could. Her long hair swirled through the air as she flipped aside. This lateral movement almost sent her tumbling to the ground, but a quick swing of her arm allowed her to regain her balance. A shot grazed her arm. With the curse scorching her left shoulder, she did not flinch. Aoko knew she could hold on as long as she continued to avoid a direct fin shot.
Snap.
Off balance and in pain, it took her half a second to recover. The moment she raised her head, she deflected the attack with a fist full of magical energy.
せーの。
If the puppet had a will of its own, its eyes would have popped right out of its sockets. It would have been floored, shocked at the strong will that allowed the girl to perform a series of moves like this. Ako's resolve was instantaneous. Response was instantaneous. Look at me, just making up words. While her power was not sufficient to completely redirect the arm's trajectory, it was just enough to deflect it harmlessly past her hair. Chant became a curse that robbed Aoko of her vitality. Did it still have something left in the tank? Or was it actually indignant? Whatever the reason, Aoko was easily able to resist its weakened defensive maneuver. Hit it with the launcher? Hey. And her right leg, pulsed with magical energy, shot up into the puppet's chest from below. It was much lighter than Aoko anticipated. Rather, she felt little resistance. An automaton's weight was determined by its internals, the size of its power source. Ironically, it was the superiority of its music box engine that would prove to be its downfall.
Venite, 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 meum sepulchrum, venite.
No time to be just, like, sitting around admiring your work. You should probably move. Stuttering curse. Having taken the full brunt of Aoko's kick, the puppet bounced from ceiling to floor, collapsing in a heap. Its internal construction had been warped by the impact, leaving the drum of the music box that powered the puppet warped as well.
恨むなら設計者を恨みなさい。
A little too fine of construction.
ダイナモの一つでも積んでいれば、もうちょっとは重たくなったでしょうに。
Yeah, constructive criticism later. Part of the ceiling came crashing down in front of Aoko, snapping her back to her
と
senses.
ころで今どうやってぶっ倒したんだろう
She was so stunned by her own victory that she forgot the house of mirrors had already begun to collapse.
こっちのがやばかった
Yeah. There was no time to relish in her victory or pity her opponent, not unless she wanted to meet the same fate. As the situation stood, she found it hard to imagine getting out alive.
急げダッシュだ私
She slapped herself on the cheek and took off. This was her bounty for finishing their battle in a matter of seconds. With her breathing labored by all the excitement, she ran for the exit. The collapse was intensifying by the second. Having lost its support pillars, the castle was buckling under its weight.
この邪魔
Escaping from the basement was proving to be no easy task. While she was taking the shortest route possible through the maze, she was nearly crushed by a falling piece of ceiling along the way. This was the third that she had to deal with falling rubble along the way. She destroyed the debris on the stairs with magic bullets as she ran. The automaton's jamming had long since worn off. The earlier attack had damaged the vast majority of its functions. Her breathing was heavy as she ran. The intensity surrounding her sparked her brain into overdrive. The ceiling seemed to be collapsing in slow motion. For her, a second felt like 5. Her frayed nerves made it hard to read time correctly. As her life seemed to flash before her very eyes, a light at the end of the tunnel. There was debris riddled throughout the stairway, forcing her to crawl up it. She emerged from the destroyed basement into the collapsing first floor. That the plaza was still traversable at all was a miracle in itself. Fortunately for her, the crucial path to the exit was still intact.
よしついてる
The corridor to the entranceway was still intact. The basement maze only extended as far as the plaza, so the entrance corridor wouldn't collapse. Only the ceiling would cave in, leaving the scaffolding surrounding it intact. She got herself this far by telling herself repeatedly that fate would decide whether or not she reached the plaza. Her gamble paid off. It was her lucky day. All she had to do was muster the last of her strength and keep moving forward until... She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Was it a naivety? A sense of responsibility? She pushed aside the image that popped into her head and continued running down the corridor.
言っとくけど時間合わせの余裕はないわよ
Yeah, he'll make his own way out.
そんな上等な作戦じゃないし
No point in waiting.
お互いできることをやったら最速で出口に向かいましょう
That was 5 minutes ago. At the time, Sotaro had nodded with trepidation. Aoko had not bothered to ask herself why.
何様だっての私今は走ることだけ考えろ
The corridor was giving out too. If she were to look back, she was sure she would see the building collapsing in on her. She was also sure she had no time to waste doing so. Her luck was fading as fast as the building's structural integrity. It was a small miracle that she had escaped serious injury up to this point, and she could not afford the slightest slip-up. An ankle sprain, loss of balance, even a sneeze would be fatal. A simple pat on the back was enough to end it. So, naturally... There it was, clear as day. From the Detrius? Is that like the plural of... I don't know what part of architecture Detrius is. From the detritus of the stairway, death had arisen to take her down with it. A corpse that had crawled its way up from the depths of hell itself. It was still operational. And it was still armed with curses. It had crawled after her, watching as Aoko desperately tried to save herself. The puppet's arm shot forward. While Aoko did not turn to meet it, she could see its reflection in the mirrors.
E salvate, e salvate, e salvate.
Extend, extend, extend. This time, she could not dodge it. There was absolutely nothing she could do. The puppet with her face sang.
Venit Dominia, lut sine sumne, et pulvere simile quotidiano, cor creo, te iudi.
Well, that's not very nice. For a moment, she could not believe her eyes. This was the last thing she expected to see.
しつこいぞお前。
A fierce expression adorned the face of a boy who had been waiting in the plaza as he smashed the puppet's outstretched arm. Anger didn't really suit him at all. The weapon of choice was a fire extinguisher. He must have searched the maze for something to use as a weapon. Well, at least they were up to date on their fire code. No, never mind that. It was too crazy to contemplate, but had he stayed behind for her? Aoko stopped the feet she had sworn herself she would never stop moving and extended a hand out to him. Sojiro tossed the fire extinguisher aside and took off running. Pieces of the ceiling continued to collapse like dominoes. Kept moving, with dust and dirt following in their wake. The shadows raced through the collapsing corridor with all their strength. The castle was in its throes of death. With a massive crash and a cloud of dust, the final chapter of the fairy tale that had been Kittyland came to an abrupt end. Was that thing constructed with asbestos? If so, you guys are probably going to get mesothelioma later in life. That's going to be a rough one. This duel to the death was over. For a moment, amidst their swirling emotions, all past enmity was left behind, and the two collapsed on the lawn and basked in a strange solidarity. The ringing in their ears subsided before long. Tremor of such magnitude seemed impossible in an amusement park like this. As the sounds of destruction echoed across the park, Aoko addressed the individual at her side. While the click of her tongue was adorable, meaning behind it was anything but. It's like, shit, now I gotta kill you.
あいつどうなった？
It probably got crushed.
見ての通りよ。今頃バラバラ死体になってるんじゃない？
Hopefully. Sojiro sighed, not wholly relieved by her frank response. His reason.
でも、そんな心配より自分の心配をした方がいいと思うわよ、しずき。
He wasn't out of the woods yet after all.
青崎、子供の頃はいじめっ子だっただろ。
Was? Were? I'm pretty sure she still is.
可逆趣味はないって自負してるけど。それで、今の自分の立場、分かってる？
She sat up and smiled. Sojiro hung his head in shame, wondering why her kind tone and expression were so chilling.
面目次第もございません。
かしこまってもダメよ。あの提案には大前提があったわよね。これは取引だって。あなたが役に立つのなら見逃してあげるっていう。
Look, he tried. That thing did something that wasn't part of the plan.
わかってる。だから面目ないって言ってるだろ。
Sojiro made a show of avoiding her eyes. like a pouting child.
Uh,
Aoko was taken aback by this sulky display. Perhaps he was angry at himself rather than her. He was not mad because she would not let him go. He was mad that he had not done his part. Aoko sighed for what seemed like the millionth time that day. She could not figure out what surprised her more, his unconditional kindness, or his naive approval of it, or her naive approval of it.
じゃあ、覚悟はできてるの？
そんなのはできないけど、約束だからな。結局は何もしていないし。
We all know she doesn't have the guts. It was certainly the case that he failed to do any of the things she had expected of him. But just then, she glanced back at the collapsed house of mirrors. What had he done after failing so spectacularly? He waited and saved you. He had searched for the extinguisher so he could use it as a weapon, and waited patiently in the plaza as the maze collapsed around him because he thought it was wrong of him to leave alone. It was a foolish choice, and the exact opposite of her choice to run towards the exit without hesitation.
ま、それでよしとするか。
She was satisfied, even as she was shocked of how naive she was being. It was true that he had saved her. She smiled inwardly, admiring, if only for a moment, the bravery he continued to show in the face of such extreme circumstances.
役割は果たさなかったけど、アフターケアは合格だし、約束は守らなくちゃね。
He got some extra credit. With a nod, she pulled herself to her feet.
約束は、ま、いつか守ってもらうとして。
The girl tried to keep a straight face as she offered a hand to the boy still lying on the ground.
結果はどうあれ手助けしてもらったし。
Consider it even.
特別サービスってことで、今夜はもう手を出さないであげる。
She bashfully averted her gaze. Though her profile appeared different than it had in the past, it was clearly still a face of the vibrant girl he met the day he first arrived in town.
何よ。
As if she had felt his eyes on her, she shot him a frowning glare.
いや、突拍子もないけど、青崎は律儀だなって。
He took her outstretched hand. Feeling his weight as she pulled him up, she could not help but think that he was about the last person she wanted to hear that from.
ところで、今夜はって言うけど、明日からは。
Yeah, are we gonna have to repeat this?
さあ、ま、その時になったら考えるわ。
See how you feel when you wake up tomorrow. She shrugged her so many S's. She shrugged her shoulders as if she was not sure herself. The response was so unlike her that it made Sojiro smile. Was it the solidarity of having escaped death together, or their fleeting camaraderie that made him do so? Might have been for this night only, but the air between them was kind and gentle. A lot had transpired, but the midwinter nightmare had come to an end. The pair had overcome many trials and tribulations and could now leave the mirrored realm in their wake. But before that,
随分と身勝手ね。それはあなた一人で決めていいことだったかしら。
yeah,
青子。
rules are rules. Hi, Alice. It was the voice of a beautiful singing bird and a merciless machine all rolled into one.
アリス。
Voice quivered as she spoke the name. The lady in black made her presence known. The night was not yet over. Her name was Alice Kuonji. She was a witch whose name struck fear into the heart of Aoko, avatar of the night who would allow no witnesses. But we will deal with that next time on the next episode of Mihoyo, because that was a long one, and honestly, I'm getting like a cramp in my leg from sitting. I need to like get up. I think I fucking pinched my sciatica. Oh, Anyway, with that is where we're going to end it for today. Once again, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bell. See you all next time for the next episode of Mihoyo, where we will see how they managed to argue their way out of this one. Hope to see you guys all there later. Bye.